Good show.
Who cares what I think?
Moonjumper here. Happy Valentine's to all you lovely folks trekking out there through the cosmos. This is another sub-episode of Who Cares What I Think, featuring an excerpt from my latest full episode. Officially, it was part 2 of my Discovery versus Picard series, but in this installment, I was analyzing more broadly how different generations may view or interpret Star Trek differently. What's important to the oldest members of the fan base, that being the TOS generation, is not necessarily what's most important to the TNG generations of fans, and likewise, the concerns of both of those older groups are not necessarily the same concerns of our youngest generation of fans in the Discovery era. To preface the clip I'm about to play, it's important to understand the whole purpose of the episode was to not pass any sort of judgment on what certain groups of fans tend to like or not like, but to simply identify some of those broad general differences in taste as objectively and dispassionately as possible, with the caveat in full disclosure that I am passionate about Star Trek and that I am an old school TOS guy, so naturally I do have those biases. So in this clip, recognizing my own passions and biases and the need for all of us the old guards included, to try to have more empathy for the concerns of our fellow fans no matter the generation. And in that vein, I attempt to explain to younger fans why I feel the way I do about canon, including visual canon, why I consider visual canon just as important as any other canon. You may not agree with that, that may not be as important to you, and that's fine, but I'm making the case. This is why we feel the way we feel. But before we get started, I sound like Tim Pool. Before we get started, I want to give you a heads up to the next full episode of Who Cares What I Think coming in a few days, which will feature a major announcement that I'm super excited about regarding the present and future of this channel that you're going to want to tune in for. In the meantime, roll the tape. Discovery, especially Season 1, was patently offensive to a lot of older TOS fans, including myself. Whereas the little bit younger TNG era fans, we're not that far apart in age. We were teenagers or older in the 80s, pre-TNG. They were teenagers or younger in the 90s during TNG. And I do not think that TNG fans were generally cheerleaders for Discovery when it premiered, especially when it came to Discovery's darker, bleaker tone. However, my sense has been that TNG fans have tended to be a little more forgiving of Discovery's visual discontinuity with TOS. Well, except for maybe the Klingons. I think we all hated the Discovery Klingons. But for TNG fans, it was not so much the visuals, it was primarily the tone of the show they didn't care for. Or maybe they didn't like Michael Burnham, the idea of a central hero instead of a co-equal ensemble cast. Whereas I, having grown up on TOS, tend to fall on the flip side of that. I don't mind the darker tone, the swashbuckling action, the dominance of a central hero. That's all very TOS, but Discovery's complete lack of any visual continuity with the period whatsoever was infuriating. Some would call that unimportant. I call it canon. And yes, as an old school TOS guy who still watches it every night on H&I, Saturdays on MeTV, been watching it over and over and over again since the 70s, somehow never get tired of it, I can pretty well recite the dialogue of every episode for you. Now, I can't do that with TNG or Voyager, although I can almost do that with DS9 and Enterprise, but especially TOS. Now, whether or not that's healthy is another matter, but I can only imagine what some of you young Discovery fans out there must think of us older guys thinking, man, you're so obsessed with the look and the canon, and and you're just obsessive compulsive. You're not wrong, okay? We absolutely are. But I would just ask younger folks, as much as we old fart TOS and TNG guys need to relax a little, keeping in mind that it really is just a TV show, and that's true. And I don't like gatekeepers either. We need to welcome new fans and keep this alive for the next generation. But I would just ask the younger folks to try to understand where us older TOS and TNG folks are coming from. We have lived with this canon for decades and decades, and one day, young folks, I promise you it will happen. 10, 20, 30 years from now, some smug group of new writers and producers are going to come along and bulldoze right over the canon of some movie or TV show that you love. It might be Discovery or the MCU or whatever, and fans younger than you are going to laugh at how ridiculously outdated the clothes and hairdos of Michael Burnham and her crew are. They are going to laugh at the primitive CGI and just dismiss the Bridge of Discovery as nothing but cardboard sets, probably a lot sooner than you think, and it is going to piss you off. I promise you it's going to happen to you, and then you'll be one of us, pleading with the showrunners to respect the canon, begging the writers to at least watch the show before writing a prequel or sequel to it. It's going to happen to you. So with that in mind, try to understand why I'm certainly a lot more likely to be emotionally invested in both the lore and the look of that historical era than someone who was introduced to the franchise via one of the later spin-offs, be it TNG, Voyager, or even Discovery. To me and others who grew up on TOS, that iconic retro aesthetic, those bizarre retro technologies that still manage to propel a starship many times the speed of light, is a key part of the history of that universe. Not our universe, but that universe. And it's not just us wild-eyed fanboys. The producers and showrunners of Deep Space Nine, of Enterprise, and yes, even TNG itself, all revered and reinforced that canon every time this time period was revisited, with only a couple of footnotes which have pretty well already been reconciled.
My Targ won't even recognize me.
In the future, it may be possible to reverse the cosmetic effects.
Perhaps cranial reconstruction.
I have a feeling that's about to become very popular.
Visual canon is canon. That is what that era of history looked like in that fantasy universe, which is not our universe. Unless, of course, there really was a devastating world war involving genetic superhumans that I somehow missed in 1996. Ergo, I can almost guarantee that there is no nebulous energy barrier surrounding our Milky Way galaxy that will give you godlike powers if you pass through it. And I can absolutely guarantee you that Vulcans do not exist, Ferengi do not exist, Klingons in any form do not exist, except in the fictional fantasy universe of Star Trek, where they are absolutely real, where they exist in a canonical universe with its own history, continuity, and its own rules, which do not need to follow the rules of our reality, because the rules of our reality do not apply. So what if that fantasy future is a retro future? So what if Yeoman Rand has a funny hairdo? In that fictional universe, it's perfectly normal. It's reality. And even if it was somehow our universe, our reality being represented, why assume they would be wearing the hairstyles of 2022? How is that any more realistic than somebody wearing the hairstyles of 1966 in the 23rd century? Why couldn't they wear the hairstyles of 1966 in the 23rd century? You know, powdered wigs could be back in style for all the hell we know. Why do we have to take away the switches and buttons to replace them with touchscreens? You really think they're going to be using modern day touchscreens in the 23rd century? I was using a touchscreen to order lunch in Epcot Center in 1982, if you want to talk about retro. But the retro technologies we see, the funny hairdos we see in that fictional era of TOS are the technologies and hairstyles already established to exist in that period of fictional future history. They are canon. From my perspective, when Discovery overwrites, effectively decanonizes what we see in the original series, you have to remember that you are also simultaneously decanonizing Trials and Tribble-ations. You are decanonizing In a Mirror Darkly, both of which acknowledging and embracing the retro look of the TOS era was the whole damn point of the episode. episode, which means you are no longer just treading on visual canon, you are directly impacting story canon. The same even applies to relics. It may even be more impactful in the sense that when Scotty enters the perfectly, authentically recreated bridge of the original series Enterprise, the emotional weight of his reaction seeing this retro yesteryear of which he was a part, unlike the other two examples, there isn't even a hint of tongue-in-cheek here. It is a very moving, very poignant moment, especially when you consider the fact that they didn't have to show this bridge. The showrunners could have easily shown the motion picture bridge. They could have been like Discovery and pretended like this bridge never existed and that the TMP bridge is what it looked like all along, but they didn't do that. They recreated this bridge knowing the emotional impact it would bring to the story. The visual canon, the visual continuity is absolutely a meaningful part of the story continuity, the story canon.
You know, I served aboard 11 ships. Freighters, cruisers, starships. But this is the only one I think of.
And of course, the infamous Discovery Klingons, not only did they turn mammalian humanoids into these reptilian monsters, mutilating Tyler Vach with these horrific surgeries to make him appear human, completely ignores Affliction and Divergence from Enterprise, that whole two-parter which established a subspecies of Klingons who already look human. Tyler, who already looks like a TOS Klingon, he's perfect, could have been a human-looking sleeper agent aboard the Discovery the entire time without a single surgery. It's not just an artistic choice affecting the visuals. These are enormous plot points which impact the story portion of the canon, which Discovery ignores. Therefore, what we see in Discovery is at best anachronistic if one insists that Discovery is a direct prequel set in the same timeline as the original series. Both may be technically canon, but the continuity is dissonant to say the least. And stop the tape. Thank you for hearing me out on this, and know whichever Star Trek generation you're a member, my arms are open to you.
Timber, his arms wide.
I'll go along with that.
And I hope you have time to watch the full 36-minute episode, Who Cares What I Think, Episode 19, Star Trek Generations, pun intended. Link down below, and if you're on YouTube, at the end of this episode. Or if you're watching this on a different platform, spoiler alert, it'll be linked down below. From deep in the heart of Texas, I am Moonjumper.
Who cares what I think?